It's Friday, January 6th, 2023. Welcome to a new backcountry snowpack summary brought to you by North Shore Rescue. Some days the skiing is good and some days make you a better skier. But no matter what, when we go out in the backcountry, we should come back home with a smile on our face. If we don't, we're probably doing something wrong. And often the culprit is snow quality. Whether it's snowshoeing or skiing, we tend to focus on this a lot. And at the risk of sounding like a self-help book or a hippie, I'd say that you have to be able to find happiness in the backcountry in something different than the snow quality. And while this sounds flaky a little bit, there's actually a very important safety message in there. Because today it's fairly easy to turn around and not ski something steep. And then find your enjoyment somewhere else, maybe with the people you're with. But on a day where you show up and the snow is just amazing, but the avalanche bulletin is all orange and red, it might actually, if you're all about the powder, it might be actually difficult to say no, turn around and find your enjoyment somewhere else. So when I go in the backcountry, I see powder skiing as a bonus and skiing steep powder as the equivalent of riding a unicorn. January is typically not all that great on the North Shore. The snow quality typically gets better in February and March. And so in the past few years, I've taken to use January to work on some skills. And safety in the backcountry is so much broader than just avalanche knowledge and skills. So I suggest you do the same. Like, take January in these maybe slightly subpar conditions to work on some stuff. Today we're out with some NSR members and we're working on our rope skills to access really steep terrain, streamlining or transition and stuff like that. And maybe for you it's going to be something different. Go and take an AST1 or AST2 if you haven't done that already. Maybe take ski lessons. Being a better skier not just increases your enjoyment in the backcountry, it also reduces your likelihood of getting hurt. And it makes you less vulnerable in avalanche terrain. And speaking of getting hurt, maybe you take a wilderness first aid course, or maybe you already have one of those, and you take a few friends and you set up a scenario, pretend somebody has a broken leg and try to get out yourself without relying on search and rescue. Maybe you work on your navigation skills. Maybe you're really good with the app, but it'd be a good time to learn how to use a compass. Rope skills are great as well. Maybe take a crevasse rescue course. Even if you're staying on the North Shore and you're not going into glacier terrain, there's a lot of people who end up getting stranded in steep terrain on the North Shore, and those rope skills really come in handy. Anyways, January is a good month to work on these skills, and see it as a New Year resolution that you're only actually expected to keep for a month, so everybody wins. And then when the snow returns finally in February and March, you're a better backcountry traveler and you have more fun in the backcountry. The snowpack discussion is going to be fairly simple this week. There's not a whole lot to talk about, but there is weather coming, and depending on elevation, there's certainly some things to be aware of. So I encourage you to stick around for the snowpack discussion. We're at 1,200 meters on the north aspect, and the first thing we can see in our profile is this 20 to 25 centimeters of moist snow on the surface, and that's sitting on a crust. So the two crusts we've been talking about, early January and late December, are still present, but with the warm temperature and all the rain, they're really starting to break apart. When we test them with compression test, they still react, but they produce what's called a resistant result. So it breaks, but the column doesn't really slide off easily. It kind of settles in. Now this week, we had a little bit of snow. We had tremendous amounts of wind also. Now here on the north aspect, we're in an area where it should have been wind loaded. However, for that to happen, we need to have snow that is available for transport. And that snow needs to be reasonably light. This here is more almost like the consistency of carpenter's glue. So, you know, despite having gusts to up to 90 kilometers per hour here yesterday, there was really no wind transport to speak of. Now, this is at 1,200 meters. If you manage to, you know, go a little bit higher up, let's say you go towards Howe Sound or closer to Squamish, and you get out of that moist snow area and you start to get dry snow, then the conditions are going to change dramatically. But for most of the North Shore Mountains, in the elevation we're dealing with, you can expect to find, you know, about 20 to 25 centimeters of moist snow sitting on a crust that is reasonably supportive still with your skis. Not so much if you're walking around, you definitely punch through that. As for the weekend, you know, we have more systems coming and freezing level hovering just around the 11 to 1200 meters. So it's hard to tell how much of that is going to fall as snow, how much is going to fall as rain. There's quite a bit of wind also with these systems. So it's going to be a fairly dynamic weekend. I suspect that at lower elevation, we're still going to have sort of the wet, loose avalanche problem. And maybe at higher elevation, we'll have storm slab developing and possibly some wind slabs as well. That's all I have for this week. Stay smart, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.